All right, folks, stick with me here. So, again, there are so many people watching right now. I don't know how much you know about me, but one of my biggest issues right now is that I feel like there are a lot of not class reductionists. I feel like there are a lot of people on the left who don't do a very good job picking their allies. So there seems to be this contingent of the left that is made up of people who believe that if you're anti-establishment, that means you're an ally to the left, and that's it. Like, so they perpetuate this myth of right-wing populism. I ask you, chat, what is right-wing pro-worker populism? I ask you, was Trump right-wing pro-worker populism? The person who was anti-higher minimum wage, anti like lowered spending, anti-entitlement program, anti-welfare, pro-war. Is Trump it? In reality, right-wing pro-worker populism is just fascism. And the reason for that is because right-wing pro-worker populism essentially just means heighten inequality as long as the inequality is being suffered by the people we don't like. Brown immigrants, trans people, whatever. And if you base a society's populist rhetoric off of exclusionary hierarchical thinking, you tend to you accidentally sort of slightly do a fascism, which is kind of cringe. My argument is this: lefties should not work with the right. Or more specifically, lefties can ally over very specific solutions, but not over problems. Because the right and the left are both perfectly willing to say stuff like corporations are bad, but the right will say it's because the Jews run them, and the left will say it's because they perpetuate wealth inequality. There's a very fundamental, even if we can agree on a problem, that doesn't mean we can't agree on a solution. So agree on a solution. That's fine. If a far-right person wants welfare or something, I'll work with them on that and that specifically, to push the welfare, as long as the terms are agreeable. But I won't work with them on a broader project that we can align with regards to what we think there is an issue with. Kind of jumbled that sentence a little bit. Anyway, Crystal Ball, my favorite, very authentic, left-leaning political commentator. Take it away.
Tucker Carlson has sparked new outrage with a monologue delivered on his show Monday night. Starts out with a typical Fox News tirade about protesters, or mobs as he calls them, tearing down statues. Now, personally, when I see the fixation among Democrats on statues rather than healthcare, unions, a living wage, and jobs, I despair that the neoliberal-dominated Democratic Party will never move beyond symbols of justice to actual justice. But Tucker, he sees it quite a bit differently.
Now, right off the bat, we have a really disingenuous comparison. The Democratic Party, the actual political elected candidates, aren't focusing on statues. Protesters and individual constituencies are talking about it. The idea that, like, the Democratic Party is pulling away from some broader discourse about welfare to hyperfixate on statues is not the case. Now, I am a big fan of criticizing the Democratic Party for fixating on the aesthetics of progress rather than progress itself, but I don't think this is a valid criticism.
The real menace isn't impotence, gridlock, and virtue signaling. No, this looming statue menace, he informs his viewers, is about so much more.
Teddy Roosevelt was a hero to millions of Americans. He still is. That's precisely why they're tearing down his statue. They know that if they can force you to watch as they topple your heroes, they have won. There's nothing they can't do next. They can decide how you raise your children, how you vote, what you're allowed to believe. Once they've humiliated you, they can control you. And that's why, across the country, mobs are tearing down America's monuments.
So, if you haven't noticed, that was fucking insane. The far left, they're tearing down the statues so they can force you to watch. They get off to it. They jerk off to the memories of the tears glistening in your eyes as they watch you tear down that statue. They're doing it to fuck you. They're doing it to fuck your country. They're gonna fuck your schools. They can do anything now. They're unstoppable. They found the crystal heart within the statues and they use its divine energy to empower them. And they use that divine energy to destroy our schooling, to destroy our families. Like, this is some insane shit.
This is not a momentary civil disturbance. This is a serious and highly organized political movement. It is not superficial. It is deep and profound. It has vast ambitions. It is insidious. It will grow. Its goal is to end liberal democracy and challenge Western civilization itself.
Funny, end liberal democracy from a fascist being used as a pejorative there. Yeah, anyway, that's just some insane conspiracy rambling there. The idea that statues being taken down as part of like a deep-seated, subversive, and well-organized conspiratorial effort to destroy Western civilization. Hey, you know, it's funny, Western civilization as we understand it today literally kicked off with the desecration of monuments, the death of rulers, and the overthrow of pre-existing governments. So, you know, it's a little wacky, my humble opinion.
Now, the menacing they Tucker references never really totally spelled out. Anyone who is engaged with the left will find the idea that there is any sort of real coordinated movement, let alone that Pelosi, Biden, and the neoliberals are somehow aligned with the radical left in any way, and doing anything other than the bidding of their centrist donors is absolutely ludicrous.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of, this is what's really funny to me, by the way. At the same time, the far right will say stuff like the Democrats have kowtowed completely to the far left, but then shit like this will happen. Where was that fucking... This shit will happen. This Democrat mayor just doxed a bunch of BLM protesters on Facebook Live. She literally rolled up a stream, found a list of names, and started reading them off and their addresses. It's actually like insane. Like she should be like in jail right now. Literally just like release their names and addresses. And this is a Democrat, by the way. Later she was confronted on it, and she said it was basically just because she was mad at them because they yelled at her at a protest. Yeah. Pretty wacky stuff. Anyway, the funny thing is the far right will look at stuff like this and go, see, even the Democrats are fed up with the far left. But they'll also say, but also the Democrats are working with the far left. It's like, hey, it's almost like fascists have a habit of deliberately over and underestimating the threats that they face within to maintain a perpetual idiosyncratic and incoherent vision of what threats are posed to their order. Because doing so allows them to shift rhetorical strategies to whatever's most effective at the moment.
Where is this organized ascendant radical movement? I want to be part of it. Obviously, there is plenty of white racial anxiety thrown into the mix for good measure, the hand-wringing about Western civilization. There's a lengthy lamentation about federal hate crimes prosecutions. Kamala Harris randomly comes in for scrutiny for no apparent reason. I'm going to get to that in just a moment.
Wait. Okay, so far, I completely agree with Crystal here for the most part. I mean, some of the stuff she said early on maybe was a little disagreeable, but I agree with this.
Don't miss the forest for the racist trees, though. What really struck me most about Tucker's monologue is how much it perfectly parallels the ranting and ravings of the Russiagate resistance set over on MSNBC. Let me explain.
That's actually really fucking good. That's actually really fucking good. That's gonna make Sauger really fucking mad.
Just like in Russiagate, there's actually a cleverness to Tucker's formulation, and there are kernels of truth. He is right that there's a growing reactionary tendency and intolerance of dissent broadly among the left.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, coming from her, I'm a little critical, I think, but there is some truth to that.
Certainly attest to that. So can Lee Fong. So can the guy who lost his job for tweeting out a study about the political impacts of riots. Tucker critiques Trump and some Republicans from the right, blasting Trump for not being aggressive enough with those mobs, giving his piece a sense of intellectual courage and independence. He also has a pretty accurate analysis of Joe Biden. He calls him a babbling husk and nothing but a jumbled collection of talking points from the early 70s. Fair enough.
All right. Yeah. Listen. All right. Yeah. All right. I'll take that one. I'll take that porch.
Enough. But then he bizarrely argues that someone tough and calculating and purposeful like Kamala Harris will change the country. And that's kind of the perfect encapsulation of how he jumps from something that is actually true to drawing a conclusion which is totally absurd. If you've been watching this show, you know that Kamala Harris isn't some ideological tour de force in waiting. If she was so calculating and purposeful, she wouldn't have changed her campaign slogan with the season, might have had some idea why she was running for president in the first place, and would have had to drop out before a single vote was cast to avoid losing in her own home state. In Russiagate, they took the real Russian hacking and interference and made it apocalyptic and insane.
This was my criticism as well. There were a bunch of... Guys, are you ready for two simultaneous facts that are not contradictory? First of all, Russians interfered in our 2016 presidential election, and that is very bad. Second of all, the Democrats turned this into a crazy fucking giant conspiracy mongering bullshit sandwich that they ran with for years afterwards. Both of these things are true. It's important to keep both in mind. Don't let lefties dismiss the Russian allegations altogether, because there was interference and it was very, very bad. But also, when you know, you can't let that kernel, you can't run it off into the sunset, you know?
Donald Trump is a Russian asset since 1987. Here, Tucker...
I do think that Trump is a Russian. I think that Trump is basically an asset to every far-right authoritarian. Whether or not... Well, it depends on what you mean by asset. If by asset you mean, like, literally on the payroll, then no, obviously not. But if you mean, like, are they an asset? Like, are they a benefit to these groups? Then, yeah, 100%. Yeah, he's like... Yeah, for sure. The fact that, like, the most damning thing with Trump specifically, not just the fact that he had like millions of dollars in liquid like business investments in Russia at the time, it was literally that when he was running back in 2016, one of his campaign staff told Russian officials they would not need to respond to Obama's sanctions on Russia, because the implication being that if Trump won, Trump would remove them, and then Trump removed them. And those sanctions were actually hugely effective in curtailing Russia's growth. So, like, that's a pretty... And the person... Who was the person involved in that? Because that person's in jail now. Who was the person who did that? The person who informed the Russian agents that they would not... It was Flint? That was Manafort? Was it Flynn or Manafort? Was it both? Let's just say it's all of them. Anyway, it's a real thing.
Starts from a real trend, lack of tolerance for dissent, and invents an entire nationwide conspiracy to...
Yes, it was Flynn Manafort. Thank you.
...destroy Jesus and challenge Western civilization itself. Tucker's format is even the mirror image of #1 resistance hero Rachel Maddow, with the long opening monologue drawing viewers into a fabricated world of grave peril and existential crisis, followed by a series of guests who agree to illuminate some corner of this frightening world. The tone is conspiratorial. Only you, loyal viewers, know the real truth. But it all leads to the same conclusion. Doesn't matter how crappy our side is, how much they sell us out, you have no choice but to stand with them, because the other side is a threat to everything you hold dear.
My issue with this is that that's true. The problem is you just have to be cynical of that fact. You have to agree, yes, we have to vote Biden because Trump is a greater threat to everything we hold dear, so on and so forth. But then you have to say, well, it's not enough to just capitulate to that system. We have to engage in direct action to circumnavigate that, like, dichotomy, you know? That is the correct answer. Vote blue no matter who, but then after you're done voting, pressure the Democrat Party and go crazy with your fucking direct action, you know? Bully Biden, yeah, for sure. But I don't like this highly dichotomous framework where you're either a shill for the DNC or you're an enlightened centrist who knows the truth, which is that in actuality, you know, their parties are both basically the same.
Here's Tucker explicitly making the case.
Who can save us from that? Well, as of right now, only Republicans can save us from that. Not because they're inherently virtuous, not because they want to, they don't, but because they're the opposition party, to the extent they still have opposition to anything. We have no choice but to ask for their help. The Republican Party is the only power center left in this country available to people who dissent. It doesn't matter who you voted for last time. This is not an endorsement of anyone's policies. It's an acknowledgement of who holds power and who doesn't. And the Republican Party is the only power center available.
Sounds exactly like the vote blue no matter who argument, doesn't it? All of that supposed intellectual independence and fierceness ultimately just boils down to a more clever way of cheering for the Fox News home team.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that's an example of Tucker Carlson being smarter than the quote unquote populists on our side, because he's correct. Because if you want to stop BLM, if you want to keep those statues up, you should go ahead and vote for Trump. He's correct. You can argue that makes him more of a shill or less of a populist or whatever, but the fact remains the strategy he is engaging in is more effective than the strategy of, well, let's not vote for anyone and just kind of, well, maybe the DNC will just maybe we'll make a third party and it'll get more votes than the Republican Party. You know, like, it works. It's true. Tucker, thank you for making my case for me. You fucking piece of shit.
Just as Maddow does to suburban wine moms, Tucker terrifies his viewers into believing that the end is nigh if they do anything but vote red.
Wait, hold on here. There's a difference. The difference is that Tucker engages in massive, like, fascist baiting conspiracy bullshit to pull his viewers to voting for Trump, whereas Rachel Maddow, because I've seen what Rachel Maddow does, more or less just correctly describes what Trump is doing. That's the big difference. Tucker Carlson has to invent a conspiracy theory about the death of Western civilization. Rachel Maddow just has to point to things the Trump administration has done, directly from elected officials, not some nebulous conspiracy theory. Though, of course, the Russiagate stuff does often get thrown in there. The fact remains that the level of criticism here is not comparable.
The stakes are existential. Maybe if Antifa was just controlled by the Russians, they could all get on the same page here. Here's how he closes his monologue.
We need help, and we need it right now. These are not protests. This is a totalitarian political movement, and someone needs to save the country from it.
A totalitarian political movement. Sounds a little bit like the resistance liberals falling all over each other to declare Trump as Hitler and Mussolini times a million.
See, this is the enlightened centrist bullshit that I can't get behind. Trump is you're literally doing the enlightened centrist thing. You're looking at Democrats calling Trump a fascist, which is a very defensible claim, and Tucker Carlson claiming that the left is an authoritarian movement trying to destroy the West, which is an indefensible claim, and you're claiming these are the same thing. This is the bullshit that I'm talking about.
Let me tell you, folks.
Like, she's criticizing Tucker Carlson, but she's criticizing him for not buying into the enlightened centrist bullshit, not for being a fascist. This isn't a real criticism of Tucker Carlson. You're criticizing him for being politically effective. You're criticizing him for being intelligent. He's affecting his own political goals here. You're like looking at him and you're like, well, Tucker, I thought you thought the Democrats or Republicans are the same. They are.
I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but there's nothing any more existential happening this November than what normally happens. Two political parties representing the donor class and pandering to identities.
Nah, but seriously? There's nothing about the 2020 election that's in any more, like, meaningful. Do you have any idea how many precipices we are standing upon right now as American citizens? Yeah, there's no difference between the Republicans and Democrats. Let me tell you guys, this enlightened centrist bullshit of Dems and Republicans are exactly the same is legit, like, 7th grade politics level. Well, I used to think the Dems were good, but actually they both have corporate donors. They're both the same. It is an incredibly reductive, indefensibly juvenile approach to political engagement. And it is fascist apologia. Because yes, democratic neoliberal corporatism is preferable to far-right fascist corporatism. There is a meaningful difference between those things, and to suggest otherwise is to step on the throats of everyone the Trump administration is trying to pull over. This segment that Crystal Ball is speaking at right now was done after the Trump administration just took LGBTQ people off of medical protections, removed their medical rights. This happened after the Trump administration walked up to the Supreme Court and said, well, hey, can we make it so gay people can't adopt? This is after Trump put out said that if the looting starts, the shooting starts. This is after Trump attacked Lafayette Square and gassed innocent protesters so he could awkwardly pose with a Bible. This is the America that Crystal Ball is looking at and saying there's no difference between both sides. What a fucking stupid. How do you get a fucking syndicated show when you're this dumb? Well, the answer is if your stupidity aids and abets the far right, then, you know.
As a way to avoid actually...
Oh yeah, this is after Donald Trump said he deliberately slowed down testing so that the numbers would look lower and make his administration better. A legitimate crime against humanity that he committed to consign this country to a plague because the alternative would have made his numbers look worse. And she's like, oh, well, same thing. Corporate donor class. I'm very populist. I'm very big brain. I'm very pro-worker.
Securing rights for anyone outside the capital class. And their allied cable news networks ginning up arguments, some savvier than others, that the real enemy isn't those structures of power and concentrated wealth, but rather your fellow Americans. Whoever is selling it, I'm not buying.
Except Rachel Maddow criticizes systems of power when she talks about the crimes of the Trump administration, because the Trump administration is the presidential administration. Rachel Maddow, for all of her vacuous neoliberal bullshit, is actually criticizing a system of power. Tucker Carlson invented a conspiracy theory about the death of the West via Antifa. Even in the examples you have provided, Rachel Maddow is engaging in systemic critique. Do you not see a difference between Tucker Carlson attacking protesters and Maddow attacking the president? This is the same with regards to how much the system of power is being critiqued? Unbelievable.
And sorry, I don't watch cable news that much, and I don't buy into this whole, we've talked about this on the show, like, oh,
welcome
you're
back,
out
Sauger.
beyond the pale, and you shouldn't engage with the argument, whatever.
Hold on, I actually got to chill for a second. Oh, man. I really hate this bitch. I thought this would be criticism of Tucker Carlson. Her criticism was just, he doesn't subscribe to the same innocuous, vacant, stupid, anti-intellectual, enlightened centrist bullshit that I do. All right. All right, we're chill. Yeah, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to ail my pain.
But when I watched this monologue, it kind of popped up on my feed. I was really struck by the parallels between what he is doing for the MAGA right versus what Rachel Maddow did for like the resistance left. It all roads lead to like, this is existential, your fellow American is somehow terrifying, and the only thing you can do no matter what is vote for your team.
Well, I think the only difference though is that Trump was not a Russian asset, was actually quite incompetent at doing much of what he wants to do, and that the left and the Democrats are very competent at going after things that people on
the Democrats competent. Can you imagine? Do you know on this show? The oh yeah. Oh yes, the exceedingly effective Democrats. American Democrats, well known for their ability to get shit done.
On the right hold dear. So like, they're very competent at taking down Teddy Roosevelt's statue. They're going to take down a statue here in D.C., an emancipation statue funded by freed slaves and dedicated by Frederick Douglass of Abraham Lincoln. I think that's crazy. And so what
Where? How is it? Is a statue of Abraham Lincoln being taken down? Oh, I saw this one. This is the really yikesy one. I remember this. I remember this one. Listen. Okay, listen. I understand the sentiment is just, okay? But my God, does this statue not look bad now? Listen, again. Okay, listen, we have to understand, okay? I'm sure that at the time, the spirit behind this statue was just lovely. And you know what? This statue should go in a museum. This is a historically valid, beautifully sculpted statue. I think this should go in a museum. I think this should be a centerpiece in a museum. I don't know about having this in the middle of Washington, D.C. It's a little wacky. It literally has the fasces on. A lot of stuff has the fasces on it. Anyway, yeah, geez. This is the biggest fucking white savior statue I've ever seen in my fucking life, you know? Holy shit. The gigantic, besuited, intelligent, educated, white Abraham Lincoln looking down on the chained slave. Yeah, anyway, it's pretty wild. The meaning of the statue is that the slave is standing up. He bowed to Lincoln, who told him to bow only to God, so it's supposed to represent the slave standing up. It's not meant to be white savior shit. It just gets misinterpreted a lot. Oh yeah, I'm sure. However, death of the author. It's been over a century. We have to recognize that this literally looks like a black guy kneeling down to shine some white boy shoes, you know? That is what this looks like. This looks like Abraham Lincoln walking up and saying like, "I freed your people. Now shine my shoes." Yeah, so that is what it looks like. You know what would be a Chad fucking statue, though? This would be a Chad statue, okay? This would be a Chad fucking statue, all right? It's Abraham Lincoln and like leaning against a podium and a freed slave, shirtless, and they're putting one in. They're shaking hands. Big, just the big just the big fucking like the meme, you know, from Predator. With Arnold Schwarzenegger and the other guy, yeah, just the fucking big, and they're smiling at each other, yeah. Now, obviously, that probably wouldn't have happened back then because Abraham Lincoln was still like a racist. It's like back, hey, listen, just because the slaves were freed does not mean the president shakes hand with a black man. But still, I think that'd be, I think that would be a good meme, you know, very good meme. What do you think about removing founding father statues? I don't know. I mean, some of them are good, some of them are bad. They're just statues. They're just statues. Like, you know, we freak out so much about the symbolism. I don't care about statues. I care about material harm. You know? I care about... Do I care about an emancipation statue or do I care about reparations? Like, you know, like what's my priority here? Now, as for this particular statue, this is very clearly a well-crafted, lovingly sculpted statue, and for that reason, I think this deserves to be in a museum. But I can understand how, in this day and age, walking by this, it does look like he looking for a shoe shine. And that is a little weird. Oh, if you want to get really sentimental over it, by the way, if you want to get like big brain sentimentality over it, then think about it this way, okay? What greater an approval of the legacy of Abraham Lincoln could there be than those who are the progenitors of the slaves he freed, rising up to challenge once more the systems of racial oppression that they have been born under? It's like that old quote, you know, like that anarchist guy said, "I long for a society where I would be hanged as a reactionary." It'd be like that, you know? Imagine Abraham Lincoln's ghost looking down from above and smiling as he watches all the fucking BLM protesters, you know, challenging racism once more. That's the real meme right there, okay? That's the real way to look at it, all right? All right, back at it.
Tucker is saying, and I think you're misunderstanding the vote red no matter who. What he's saying is that it's the only power center available in order to use it as a vehicle to get what you want done.
Yes.
And I think the same thing was the Bernie Sanders calculus, right? Which was use the Democratic Party. You can't do this from the outside. You have to have a power center.
How is a fucking dipshit fascist like Sauger better at understanding this than the average fucking lefty? Jesus.
What he's calling on there is to hold Republicans accountable, and he's actually calling them out for the cowards and the morons that they actually are. And he's saying you can use that power center to actually get what you want. So that's what I would say is, like, it's not a conspiracy. They actually are trying to destroy, like, our history. They actually are, like, that's the thing you're pointing to Kamala.
Hey. You know how fascists are constantly misappropriating symbolism and using them as a stand-in for the real world? History does not die with statues, my dude. Are you fucking kidding me? Just like a What, you take down a statue, Abraham Lincoln, and then the fucking text, his chapter in the textbook is erased? We all forget, all the historians, like, ooh! They run to their library, you know, but it's too late. Like, the whole section on the Civil War is on fire. They pick up like the burned scraps of paper. And the Emancipation Proclamation by who? Who wrote it? But they can't find anything? Was it all just a dream? Yeah, exactly. They're just fucking statues. Come on.
Kamala does have one ideology, critical race theory. Like, Trump is, I mean, Tucker is
she
not
doesn't
wrong.
even stick with that. She was like a law and order prosecutor in California.
I have zero
but hold
doubt
on, Sagar.
that they're going to have diversity and inclusion stuff under Vice President Kamala Harris, who will force the Department of Justice to sue every city in the country.
God forbid we have diversity and inclusion.
Oh, yeah. Kamala Harris, well known for using her power to address racial injustice. How far right do you have to be to think that fucking Kamala Harris is going to be the divine lefty arbiter of political correctness? Kamala's going to be the most likely VP candidate, I think.
But you can't say, but we talk about Virginia here, right?
Sure.
But we talk about what happens when the neoliberals get in charge. And what's happening right now in this town, not in local cities where there is real progress happening, or frankly in the primaries last night where I think some progressive candidates won who may not have otherwise in this protest movement. But you look at Virginia, and it's dominated by Democrats, still last in the country in workers' rights. But what have they done? They've gone after the statues. And we rightly ridicule that as like...
Who's they? Democrats haven't gone after the statues. Protesters have. I'd be willing to bet a lot of the protesters are actually more like in Bernie's camp, like populist left. Do you think that if I went to like the average BLM protest and I asked them who they voted for from the beginning, they would say fucking Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden? No, these people are probably fucking Bernie Sanders fans. The people who are taking down these statues are already people who are on board with the idea that, wow, I did pause in a really wacky face there, didn't I? Look, we'll just move on.
Pathetic. And so sort of like, yes, okay, I'm down with getting rid of the Confederate statues. Let's do it. I think some of the statues that have been pulled down are too far. I don't really care that much either way. It is like not remotely high on my list of priorities. So you can't on the one hand be like, this is meaningless and sort of pathetic, and on the other hand be like, this is a totalitarian political movement that goes against everything we stand.
True! Calling out the inherent idiosyncrasy of fascism, the constant misinterpretation of the threat posed to you. Is it a pithy little baby thing? Little baby protesters? Or is it the death of Western civilization? You gotta decide, buddy, because it can't be both.
And they're coming for your churches next, and the left is not organized. There is no like grand conspiracy.
True.
George Soros, he didn't say this, happened to say this last night, but this is one of the right wing because George Soros isn't funding all of this. You got a bunch of people who are upset, who are in the streets, who are trying to make a political point.
True.
And you got people here who don't want to do anything other than like the symbolism of kneeling in kente cloth. There's nothing bigger going on than that. And to paint it as some like, national coordinated movement to destroy your way of life, I think it just terrifies people and sets them against each other rather than what we try to do on this show.
Wow, the far right using racial agitation to set workers against one another to distract them from engaging in meaningful like economic praxis? That's only a 1 million year old strategy.
Which is to point the blame at the people here in this town and the structures of power that are actually destroying people's lives here in this country.
But the difference is that the people in power, both Republican, Democrat, Capitol, are all fine with pulling down the statues. And look, like...
What Republicans in power are okay with pulling down the statues? What? Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, the Republican Party is just being totally nonchalant about all these statues getting taken down. What the fuck are you talking about? How delusional do you have to be to invent a persecution complex on this specific issue?
I agree. It is ridicule. If it stops at the statues, which is every Republican in the country right now wants to turn this into a culture war issue. And they only want to fight on this ground. But actually, even then, half of them aren't even doing that. Well, all they want is to keep cashing their donor checks. And look.
How tiring does it get to watch this show? Well, everything is actually the same. They just want to keep their donor money. Actually, all politics, well, this is because they want their donor money. It is so, it's like if you took Marxism, but then you stripped away all the analysis and all you have is like a couple of buzzwords, and then you don't even use those buzzwords. You use the bastardized versions of those buzzwords, and then you hit your head until you forget what they originally meant, and then you just repeat them over and over again. Jesus Christ. Like, like, well, actually, all politics is, well, they're trying to make money. God, fuck me, dude. I know, I can say this. In high school, I would have enjoyed this show very much. Back when I was 14, 15, 16, this would have been, I would have watched this and I would have thought, like, yeah, they get it.
What I want is for those donor checks to stop and for them to actually defend some of our history. But it is an
defend some of our history. Notice how he said that right there? He was like, well, people are getting so fixated on this culture war bullshit, but then he had to throw it in there at the end because he does care, because fascists don't give a shit about helping the working class. But they do care about co-opting pro-worker language in attack against progressivism.
An attack on the way that we look. It's like what our kids get taught in schools forms the way that we think. That is an attack on this, which is that under a Kamala Harris, Joe Biden administration, the way that we teach history is going to be different under the federal Department of Education.
Maybe it'll be better. This is literally him saying we should keep inaccurate textbooks to indoctrinate our children. He's not making the argument that Kamala Harris will put in fake news. He's just making the argument that they'll change the textbooks. That's a good thing. Current American history textbooks are dog shit. They're terrible.
Liberals get this whenever they're all freaked out about Betsy DeVos. That is actually an attack on the way of life.
See, I actually think conservatives get this much more, which is why all the textbooks are written in Texas.
Sure, right.
And why, that version of history has been overwhelmingly taught in the country.
See, this is the thing back to the
she needs to push back on this harder. There are literally states right now that push the states' rights variant of the Civil War. Like right now, our history textbooks are skewed horribly to the far right, changing our way of life.
They don't need organization. The whole media is on their side. There's not one Democratic leader who's spoken out for a U.S. grant or for Abraham Lincoln statue. A Democratic mayor wants to take it down.
What does this have to do?
Protesters outside yesterday said they're going to tear it down tomorrow. Again.
Notice how he keeps jumping around? He kept saying earlier that nobody should care about this culture war shit, but now he's hyper fixated on it.
Again, I think this is crazy. And what I'm saying is power, capital, all these other people are totally fine with all of this happening.
Sure.
And so Republicans actually are the only ones who could do anything about it. Now, they're not going to. That's what he's saying. He's like,
what?
They're not going to.
What?
The statue thing is perfectly emblematic, though, of the sort of symbolic culture fights that they...
This guy is double thinking in front of me right now. He's doing a double think. He's saying Tucker Carlson's advocating for voting for Trump is a good thing because you use the power systems you have. But then he said, but actually, he won't actually do anything. He's simultaneously trying to push people to vote for Trump while also defending his enlightened centrist bullshit position that they're all the same. We're literally watching doublethink right now. Those are completely incompatible positions. They're mutually exclusive. You can't believe both of them. You cannot at the same time believe that true populists like you should recognize the fact that no elected official is going to get anything done because they're all part of the donor class, but then also argue that you should use these power structures when they're available because it's the only way to get things done.
They like to have in this town that don't end up actually changing anything meaningfully.
Totally.
This is actually such a perfect example of how enlightened centrism enables fascism. This is actually so perfect. Sauger is simultaneously juggling the enlightened centrist position that everything is just the donor class, while also pushing for the invocation of like a fascist political order. It's actually incredible how he's like juggling this right now.
And that's the part that I'm getting at here, is that what Tucker is arguing is that it goes way beyond the statues and it's going to really fundamentally change life in America. And my point is like, no, it's quite the opposite. When I see what's going on with Elizabeth Warren talking about statues in the rotunda or whatever she's talking about, I don't even honestly know, but some statue that she's upset about. And again, take the Confederate statues down. No problem with that. Do it. It's fine.
I appreciate Crystal Ball's complete unwillingness to challenge anything Sauger was saying. You notice how Sauger was the one making strong prescriptive statements here, and every time Crystal Ball talks, she just rambles?
Fine, like long overdue. But it always stops there. It doesn't go any further. It doesn't fundamentally change life for people. And so the idea that this is leading in this terrifying existential direction, again, I don't think there's anything particularly existential about this presidential election versus the last presidential election versus the presidential election before this. We had on the right for the Trump election, it was like the Flight 93 thing, and you got to storm the cockpit because they're going to change our way of life. That was absurd. It was absurd when the left, like when Hillary Clinton lost, and I was part of this, was like so freaked out. Life has gone on. Like the most apocalyptic concerns about Trump is Hitler and he's gonna destroy liberal democracy, exact same thing.
She's not saying anything. Holy fuck. She is so unwilling to just say, meaningfully challenge any of the points she ostensibly disagrees with. I like, by the way, how the right-wing populist here is intelligent enough to still push for people to vote for Trump, whereas the left-wing populist over here is, well, she's either not intelligent enough to push people to vote for Biden or knows that she shouldn't be pushing people to vote for Biden because she knows who produces her show, a Republican, and who owns the Hill, a Trump friend. But, you know, I mean,
that Tucker says in this monologue isn't true. And so I think it's a disservice to your viewers to paint this terrifying portrait based on, you know, symbols, based on statues, based on much less than what you are making it out to be. And again, ultimately, very conveniently, leading to the same place that Rachel Maddow and MSNBC leads, which is, look, you might have a problem with some of their policy. You might have an issue with Joe Biden and the fact that he did the 94 crime bill and the fact.
Yeah, I think I agree with what a flat cap just said in chat. No, she is saying something. She's saying it doesn't matter that Trump got elected and nothing makes any difference. She's just the weak liberal of the pairing, like that one Fox News show. Yeah, I do think so. Yeah. She's just kind of the weakling that's thrown on here. When Sauger makes statements, they're strong and effective. He pushes for Trump in a roundabout way, admittedly. Crystal just makes these long run-on claims, constantly pays deference to right-wing populism, doesn't really advocate for any solutions of her own, doesn't advocate for anything better with regards to the Democratic Party, insults the Democratic Party, doesn't really challenge the Republican Party that much. She's just like the weakling. I do actually think that Crystal Ball might not be deliberately dishonest, because the way she's struggling right here just kind of more gives me the impression that she's not bright enough to know what she's being used for. You know?
That he hasn't apologized in the Iraq war, like, you might have an issue for that, but you got no choice. You got to vote blue.
But I didn't actually see anything in that where he's like, you have to vote Republican. What he was saying
said that, he's vote red.
Well, no,
he said the only thing you can do is vote for Republicans. That is literally what he said.
Well, he's saying, well, actually, I didn't hear that part, and we should replay it if he did, because as what I...
Were you not paying attention? He literally said that at the end. Tucker Carlson said the only way to avoid existential destruction of the West is voting Republican. He literally invoked the strongest possible argument in favor of voting for Trump.
I heard is that Republicans are the only power center that are actually available for you in order to hold any sort of defense. Now, I mean, if he did say that, I actually disagree with it completely, because I don't think that that is the way. You've talked a lot about, and I actually agree with this, withholding votes. If I was, you know, in a local district and my congressman is a standard issue GOP corporatist and all he had to say was on the statues versus a standard issue corporatist from the Dems, I probably just wouldn't vote. Honestly, I really wouldn't. And I think that is a pretty reasonable way in order to approach the election. So if that's what he said, I disagree with it.
He's lying. He's lying right now. There's no fucking way. There is no way. I think he's coping right now. If I go back through a bunch of Rising videos, am I going to find him frequently advocating voter abstinence for Republicans? Notice how he had to introduce a caveat there. Just a regular corporate Dem who allows the statues to be taken down versus a regular corporate Republican who allows the statues to be taken down. I bet you that he would be very, very, very willing to adjust his goalpost for what constitutes a non-corporate Republican who isn't okay with the statues being taken down, and thus you should vote for them. In fact, considering the fact that every single Republican hates the statues being taken down, he has an out for every single district in the country. Oh, this isn't just a regular corporate Republican who doesn't care about the statues. This person cares about the statues, so obviously you should vote for a Republican. That caveat is the only reason he's able to get away with his little fucking voter abstinence dishonesty.
But those statues and those other things, they mean something to people. They mean a lot to people. And discounting
All right, I've had enough. Again, it's just fascism and Crystal Ball's enlightened centrist bullshit actively enabling it. Interestingly, this video had a fair number of dislikes. I wonder why. Here's a person defending Tucker Carlson, 140 likes. He's right, though. They do hate the country and Western civilization and to some extent white people. I really like Sauger. He's pretty level. Crystal is a psycho. The diversity, equity, and inclusion model is the wrong approach to equality. Tucker is spot on this. I think Crystal is way off. Sauger knows Republicans ain't staying home to not vote no matter what he says. That's interesting. I've heard a lot of left-leaning people saying that The Rising has a healthy balance of left and right-leaning people who are concerned equally with promoting worker-oriented politics. And yet, for some reason, when I look through these comment sections here, there are a lot of far-right sounding people who are pushing conspiracy theories about the left destroying America. Crystal is living in a fantasy world. Total fail here for Crystal. The difference is Russia was fake and the statues coming down is real. Remember, you said this November election will be just like any other election. There will be a lot more, and it's surprising that everyone isn't aware of this by now. I guess if your party isn't already being shut down on social media and fired from your jobs by something you said or even agreed with, then you're blind to reality setting in. There were like 6 typos there. So actually, this election matters because the far left is shutting down all Republicans and it's the end of Western civilization. It's really interesting because the entire point of Rising is supposed to be about how we're supposed to look past the petty culture war and work together on class-based issues, except everyone in the comments section is focusing on that culture war, largely from a right-leaning perspective, and Sauger was also hyper-fixated on that culture war, avoiding talking about class issues in favor of lying about the West being threatened by statues being taken down. That's so interesting. Nobody during that entire segment talked about worker issues, but the accusation of both parties being a donor class who don't care about worker issues was used as a whataboutism to avoid criticisms for reactionary politics. Interesting. I can't say this more severely. Crystal Ball is either a complicit or an idiot, unwitting participant in Rising's deliberate attempt to push fascist rhetoric on its viewership by promoting the completely untrue idea that there is a contingent of far-right populists who are willing to work with the left on class issues. There is not. Rising does not talk about class issues. They use the existence of class issues as a dismissal of the idea that there is a difference between the Democrat and Republican Party. And then Sauger will come in and say that actually there are differences, and the difference is that the Democrats want to destroy Western civilization, and for that reason you should be a Republican. The entire pretense of the show is from the bottom up, completely dishonest. And the fact that there are leftists who watch this and believe they're watching a genuine, attempt to reach across the aisle and engage in pro-worker politics is incredibly disgusting to me. So yeah, don't ever trust Rising. Don't trust Crystal Ball. She is, whether or not she's aware of what she's doing, she's complicit in fascist propaganda. Enough. This will not be the last thing I say about this. There's still Jimmy Dore to talk about. Kyle Kalinske still defends this shit. No. No. I get enough of this fascist bullshit from the right. I am not having it come from people who consider themselves left. This is the new arc. The dawn of a new fucking era, okay? We are getting these bullshit pseudo-enlightened centrist fascist enablers out of the fucking left. All right? Because they're not properly left. If you want to call this cancel culture or gatekeeping, sure. And this is a gate I am erecting. I am building the wall! And it just got 10 feet higher. And this wall is between the left and fascism. That's a good wall, folks. It's a good wall. We are painting it gold. It will go up so high that both sides of the fucking wall will be constantly drenched from the precipitation of the cloud line that rams into it all day, every day. It will extend past the atmosphere. It will be a space elevator. But only one side will get to use it, okay? And we will make the fascists pay for it. Fuck this. It gets me so goddamn angry. We have enough to deal with right now, the left. It's difficult enough, the shit that we deal with right now, you know. America is not exactly a country permissive of you have very permissive of far-right ideology. Not exactly permissive of far-left ideologies. We don't exactly have anyone in the seat of power to help us. Trump is a literal fascist. The only thing keeping Trump from being a Mussolini-style fascist is the fact that our civil democracy is strong enough to keep his worst impulses at bay. If you're a fascist in America, all you have to do is wake up and watch a fucking address from the presidential administration, jerk off, and you've had your cup of tea. If you're a leftist, you have to work a little bit harder. And I do work. Every day, I wake up and I think, wow, we sure have a long fucking way to go. And then I go on YouTube and I got my bread tube where there are leftists or at least soak dems, and they're doing what they can, and sometimes I agree and sometimes I disagree, but fuck me, at least we're pushing in the same direction. And then I see shit like this. I see the most blatant, flagrant efforts to co-opt left-leaning language in order to push a far-right agenda, which is, hey, literally what Hitler did. If you want to look at the precepts that he laid out for the National Socialist policy, before he took power, all the promises he made that he never fulfilled, his very deliberate attempts to appeal to the generally socialist unemployed class, and the poor workers suffering from the inflation, from the Great Depression, all the capitulations he promised and then never made because he was using those talking points as a stepping stool to power. I mean, pardon me, this is literally what they did. And Trump did the same thing. Trump talked about draining the swamp. Trump talked about the average American worker. Trump talked about bringing the Rust Belt back. Trump talked about ending the exporting of the outsourcing of jobs. And what did he actually do? I mean, he did none of it. Rust Belt's still dead. The tariffs ended up hurting small businesses more than any other. The swamp yet remains, judging from the fact that the Mueller investigation turned over fucking dozens of arrests and credible indictments against Trump administration members, far more than any previous administration. I'm not entirely sure if the swamp was what he drained. And what do we get for it? Well, we get the fetid corpse of far-right populism, the myth of far-right populism being kept alive by people like this. And most infuriatingly, there are people who I do believe, for all their faults, are actually left-leaning, like Kyle Kalinske, defending this horse shit. Actual leftists who are so brain-addled that they will listen to anything remotely populist and they will think, oh yeah, that's base, that's epic, that's revolutionary, my dude, excellent, fantastic, wow, well done. They can look at a literal fascist stepping on this fucking broken neck of a juvenile locked up in a border camp concentration ring. And as long as that person then says, the Democratic and Republican parties are the same because they both appeal to the same donor class, the lefties will, oh, you're so based. You're finally a Republican who tells it like it is. This is the beginning of far-right populism in America. Wow, we'll work together. No. Far-right populism is fascism. Every time Sauger opens his mouth, he is not advocating for the working class. He is advocating for the Republicans that he knows will continue to push the reactionary politics he wants. Every time Tucker Carlson opens his mouth to criticize the Republican Party, he is not criticizing the Republican Party for being too corporate. He's criticizing them for not being far right enough. The criticisms the Nazis made of the Hindenburg administration back during the Weimar Republic were as such that they capitulated too much to the interests of the transnational corporations, that they were beholden only to the corporate donors and not to the will of the people. But the will of the people for the Nazi Party of Nazi Germany was not the will of worker populism, it was the will of fascism. It was a will to build walls. It was a will to genocide. It was a will to engage in ethno-nationalism. And that is what Sauger wants, and that is what Tucker wants, and anyone with even the slightest inclination of political understanding should be able to read this from watching 5 minutes of them advocating for any of the things that they believe in. I am not exactly a studied historian on the works and readings of Sauger, but it does not take much for me to read that. So I'm not sure how people like Kyle Kulinski and other prominent left-leaning people can possibly look at his work and think this is anything other than an attempt to pull people who are alienated from the Democratic Party following the dropout of Bernie Sanders over to the far right, because at least they will get shit done against those corporations. Well, they will, but it will not be because they oppress the working class. It will be because they are Jewish, or whatever they make up.